who repays her husband's ultimate betrayal in the most elegant way imaginable. The wall clock in the master bedroom had just struck 2 a.m. The silence was so heavy that even the air felt afraid to move. On the California king-size bed, Diana kept her eyes gently shut, though she was wide awake. She regulated her breathing, making it sound deep and rhythmic, perfectly playing the part of a woman lost in a long, peaceful dream. Yet, her ears caught every subtle movement in the corner of the room. The rustle of fabric, the soft click of the closet door opening, the quiet zip of a suitcase being closed. Every sound stung Diana's ears, slicing slowly through her heart. It was her husband, Richard. The man she had been married to for 10 years was secretly packing his bags in the dead of night. Diana knew this was coming. A wife's intuition is rarely wrong, especially when backed by the mountain of evidence she had quietly gathered. Still, Diana chose to lie frozen. She didn't jump out of bed to stop him. She didn't scream, didn't cry, and didn't beg Richard to stay. Diana let Richard believe she was just a clueless trophy wife, sleeping soundly while her world was being dismantled. A few minutes later, Richard's footsteps retreated. The bedroom door clicked shut, handled with such care it made almost no sound. Then, the low hum of a Range Rover engine echoed faintly from the garage before fading down the driveway of their Beverly Hills estate. Only then did Diana open her eyes. Not a single tear fell down her cheeks. Her gaze was empty but piercing, staring at the ceiling of a room that suddenly felt much larger. Slowly, Diana got out of bed. She walked over to Richard's custom walk-in closet. Empty. All that remained were a few empty wooden hangers swaying gently in the AC draft, carrying the faint, lingering scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne. All his designer suits, luxury watches, and the critical documents he usually kept in the small, hidden safe were gone. Diana took a deep breath and glanced at the wall clock. 10 a.m. She walked out of the bedroom, not to chase him, but to head straight to the kitchen. With total composure, Diana turned on the stove and put the kettle on. She took her favorite ceramic mug and dropped in a chamomile tea bag. Her movements were relaxed, as if this were just a normal morning routine, not the night her husband had abandoned her. Exactly 30 minutes after Richard's departure, Diana's iPhone, resting on the marble kitchen island, buzzed. A new message notification. The screen lit up the dimly lit kitchen. Diana reached for her phone. Her heart beat a little faster. Not out of fear, but anticipation. Displayed on the screen was a photo Richard had just sent. It was taken at LAX. Richard was smiling broadly, a look of absolute triumph on his face. Leaning affectionately against his shoulder was Chloe. The woman, Richard's former secretary, was smirking at the camera, proudly waving a first-class boarding pass. Beneath the photo was a lengthy text. Diana read it silently, word for word. "Goodbye, useless woman. Sorry I didn't wake you up. I was afraid you'd drop to my feet and beg. Just so you know, I've taken control of all your assets, our savings, and the company funds. Chloe and I are starting a new, much better life. Get ready to be homeless tomorrow morning. Don't try to find me. You'll never catch me." Silence fell over the kitchen. Diana set the phone face up on the counter. Steam rose from her mug, spreading the soothing scent of chamomile. Was Diana angry? Of course, there was a sting. Betrayal is always a wound. But strangely, the emotion dominating her heart right now wasn't sorrow. It was an overwhelming sense of relief. She picked up the mug, blew on it softly, and took a sip. The warmth spread through her body, delivering a peace that had been absent from this marriage for years. Diana smiled a faint, mysterious smile. She looked at her phone screen, which had now gone dark. "I pity you, Richard," Diana whispered softly. Her voice rang clear in the midnight silence. "You think you're flying toward freedom with all that wealth? You have no idea. 30 minutes ago, before you even stepped out that door, I made sure that what you packed wasn't a ticket to paradise, but a one-way ticket to your own destruction." Diana took another sip and leaned back comfortably against the kitchen counter. The house was indeed quiet now, but for the first time in years, Diana didn't feel lonely. She felt liberated. "Farewell, my problem," she whispered, closing the dark first chapter of her life and preparing to welcome a dawn that would bring a brand new one. The stillness of the kitchen at that early hour pulled Diana's memories back in time, down the corridors of her past to when this house didn't feel like a quiet graveyard, but was loud with Richard's ego and dominance. For 10 years of marriage, Diana lived in what outsiders called perfection. A handsome, successful husband, a Beverly Hills mansion, and the luxury of never having to work. But for Diana, it was merely a gilded cage that was slowly suffocating her. Richard always made sure Diana knew her place. In his eyes, she was just a domestic accessory. A housewife whose only job was to ensure his dress shirts were perfectly pressed and dinner was served hot. Nothing more. Richard often came home carrying an aura of intimidation that made the whole house hold its breath. Diana remembered an incident 6 months ago, when the seeds of suspicion first began to aggressively sprout. That night, Richard came home with a tense face, but his eyes gleamed with ambition. He tossed his leather briefcase onto the sofa and called for Diana with his trademark commanding tone. "Diana, get in here!" he shouted from the living room. Diana, who was folding laundry in the bedroom, jogged lightly to her husband. She watched him pull a thick stack of documents from his bag, scattering them haphazardly across the glass coffee table. "What is it, honey?" Diana asked softly, trying to manage the mood so as not to trigger his volatile temper. "Sign these. Now," Richard ordered shortly, shoving an expensive Montblanc pen toward her. He pointed to the bottom of a document filled with dense, tiny legal jargon. Diana took the pen, but her instincts kicked in. She didn't sign immediately. Her eyes tried to scan the title of the document. Declaration of Asset Transfer. She read it in her mind. She frowned, trying to flip to the previous page to understand the context. "What are these papers, honey? Why is there an asset transfer?" "Which assets?" she asked innocently. Richard's reaction was explosive, yet entirely predictable. He scoffed harshly, snatched the papers from her hands, flipped roughly back to the signature page, and slapped it down on the table. "You ask too many damn questions. Just sign it. How hard is that? You think you'd understand it if you read it? It's corporate law, financial jargon. A housewife's brain like yours couldn't comprehend it." Richard snapped, his face turning red, as if Diana's simple question was a massive insult to his ego. Diana fell silent. It wasn't the first time she had heard those words. Richard had belittled her intelligence hundreds of times. He conveniently forgot that before they married, Diana had graduated at the top of her economics class at UCLA. But out of devotion to her husband, she had willingly buried her career. Unfortunately, Richard weaponized that sacrifice to shrink her down. "I just wanted to know. It's my name being used," Diana said quietly, still trying to hold her ground. "Exactly because it's your name. I need to manage it. You know my business is booming right now. This is just a formality so the IRS doesn't gut us. Do you want us to go bankrupt paying massive taxes? Do you want to lose all your luxury perks?" Richard threatened. He always used the fear of poverty as a tool to control her. With slightly trembling hands, Diana finally signed the papers. Richard immediately smiled in satisfaction, pulling the documents away and shoving them back into his folder without letting her see a copy. "There you go. That's how a good wife behaves. Let the husband do the hard thinking and make the money. You just enjoy the results." "Stop pretending to be smart," Richard said, patting her cheek lightly, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt incredibly demeaning. Incidents like that repeated themselves, file after file. From opening new bank accounts where Richard instantly confiscated the checkbooks and debit cards to signing power of attorney forms for shell companies, Diana didn't even know the addresses of. Richard always used Diana's name as a shield. "Everything is in my beloved wife's name," he would boast to his colleagues. But the real goal was to keep his own name completely clean of any legal risks. But Richard made a fatal mistake. He underestimated Diana's sharp observational skills. He thought her silence meant stupidity. He didn't know that every time he slipped up, every time he left his home office unlocked with files on the desk, Diana read them. She began to realize something was terribly wrong with his business. The numbers on the financial reports she managed to peek at made no sense. There were massive influxes of cash, millions of dollars from obscure sources, routed out to offshore accounts in a matter of hours. And the most terrifying part was that the central hub for all this suspicious financial traffic were accounts strictly under the name Diana Evans. That night, in the quiet kitchen, Diana realized she wasn't being treated like a queen. She was being prepped as a sacrifice. Richard was building an empire on quicksand, and he was using Diana as the foundation. When the empire collapsed, she would be the one buried deepest, while he jumped to safety. Diana gripped her mug tightly. The memory of Richard's condescending face when he forced her to sign unread documents made her blood boil. The pain of being degraded slowly transformed into an incredibly potent fuel. "You said I didn't understand, Richard," Diana thought to herself, staring at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. "I understand. I understand perfectly. And precisely because I understand, I've let you feel like you were winning all this time. Because the easiest enemy to destroy is the one who thinks they are the smartest." That flashback confirmed one thing for Diana. Her love for Richard had died the exact moment she realized her husband was willing to make her the scapegoat for his greed. And tonight, as he drove off with those suitcases, he was actually running away with a ticking time bomb he had assembled himself through years of arrogance. Diana just had to wait for the explosion. Diana's suspicions weren't smoke without fire. After the night she was forced to sign the stack of papers, she changed. In front of Richard, she remained the obedient, slightly slow wife, but behind his back, she became a master investigator. Her big break came 3 months ago. Richard came home blackout drunk after an urgent out-of-state meeting. He passed out on the living room sofa, snoring loudly, his leather briefcase half open on the floor beside him. Usually, Diana would tidy up the bag and place it in his office. But that night, her curiosity conquered her fear. With trembling hands but quick movements, she pulled out his MacBook Pro. She knew the password. Not because he gave it to her, but because Richard was a narcissist. His password was a combination of his birth date and the license plate of his beloved Porsche 911. The screen lit up. Diana didn't waste time looking for photos or personal texts. Her economics instincts guided her fingers straight to the financial spreadsheets and automated banking apps. Her eyes widened at the rows of numbers. Millions of dollars were flowing in every month. The transaction descriptions were vague, weird codes like Logistics A1 or Consulting X. But what made Diana's breath catch was where the money ended up. The dirty money sat briefly in a shell company before being transferred to a personal account. And the account holder's name glowing clearly on the screen was Diana Evans. Diana's body went weak. She covered her mouth to stop herself from gasping. The bank accounts whose debit cards and checkbooks Richard had safeguarded all this time weren't regular savings accounts. They were holding tanks for illicit funds. Richard was using her identity as a dumpster to launder dirty money. If the FBI or the IRS ever tracked the money, the trail would stop dead at Diana. Richard looked clean on paper, just a clueless husband unaware of his wife's side businesses. Diana realized the horrific scenario. Richard had engineered it so that if his illegal operations were ever exposed, Diana would be the one rotting in a federal penitentiary. "Bastard," she hissed softly. Tears fell, not from sorrow, but from overflowing rage. As if that wasn't enough, Diana opened the messaging app on his laptop. One contact was pinned to the top. Partner C. Diana clicked on it. The profile picture was Chloe, his much younger secretary, flashing a seductive smile. Their conversation was far more disgusting than a mere physical affair. "Chloe, did the housewife sign the new wire transfer papers yet? The client is asking. We need to wash the cash before the year-end audit." Dated 2 days ago. Richard's reply made Diana's blood run cold. "Richard, safe and sound, babe. She signed it last night. Didn't read a single word. So stupid, right? She thinks it's just insurance documents. Relax. If anything goes south, she takes the fall. We just grab the cash and take off to Dubai." Diana read the text over and over. So stupid, and she takes the fall echoed in her head like a blaring siren. Chloe wasn't just a mistress. She was the brains assisting Richard in this money-laundering ring. They were conspiring together, laughing at Diana's innocence, planning a luxurious future built on the ruins of her life. They even had an escape plan ready. Diana found a hidden folder containing scanned passports and UAE visas for Richard and Chloe, along with brochures for luxury penthouses in Dubai. The date wasn't set, but the intention was clear. As soon as enough money was pooled and things got hot with the feds, they would vanish and leave her to face the American justice system alone. That night, bathed in the glow of the laptop screen, Diana no longer saw Richard as her husband. The man snoring on the couch was a monster who would sacrifice the mother of his future children for money and another woman. Diana hurriedly copied several crucial documents onto a small flash drive she found in a drawer. She took photos of the chat logs with her own phone as evidence. Once finished, she placed the laptop exactly as she had found it. Returning to bed, she stared at the ceiling with a hollow gaze. She was standing on the edge of a cliff. Her choices were binary. Wait until federal agents kicked down her door and dragged her away in cuffs, or fight back. But fighting Richard couldn't be done with emotion. He was cunning, wealthy, and powerful. If she asked for a divorce now and demanded a division of assets, he would twist the facts and use the forged evidence to put her in jail first. "I have to be smart," she whispered into the dark. "I have to walk out of this trap without a single scratch." That night was the turning point. The submissive Diana was dead. What remained was a Diana plotting a war strategy. She needed a legal loophole to turn the tables. And for that, she needed someone who understood the law better than Richard. Someone from her past she could trust. Arthur Vance, the seasoned attorney and her late father's best friend, came to mind. She had to see him tomorrow. There was no time to cry. The clock was ticking, and Diana had to move faster than her husband's wicked plans. The next day, the Los Angeles sky was uncharacteristically overcast, perfectly reflecting the turmoil in Diana's chest. She chose an old, quiet, vintage diner in Pasadena to meet Arthur Vance. It was far out of the orbit of Richard's Beverly Hills socialites and corporate spies. Soft jazz played over the hum of the coffee grinder. Diana sat in the dimmest corner booth, wearing dark sunglasses and a scarf wrapped around her neck. Her hand tightly gripped her purse containing the flash drive. Shortly after, the doorbell chimed. An older, white-haired gentleman in a sharp tweed suit walked in. It was Arthur Vance, her father's most trusted confidant, a man she viewed as an uncle. After ordering black coffee, Arthur looked at Diana with warm, paternal, yet deeply serious eyes. "Tell me everything, Diana. I know you wouldn't ask for an urgent meeting out here if it wasn't a massive problem." Diana took a deep breath. Without a word, she slid the flash drive and the printed photos of Richard and Chloe's texts across the table. Arthur opened his laptop, plugged in the drive, and began reading the digital files. Silence. 15 minutes passed with no sound but the clicking of a trackpad and Arthur's heavy sighs. The old lawyer's brow furrowed deeper with every file he opened. Finally, he took off his reading glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. He looked at Diana with profound concern. "Diana," his voice was low and gravelly. "Do you realize how dangerous your position is right now?" Diana nodded weakly. "They're using my name to launder money, aren't they, Arthur?" "It's worse than that," Arthur corrected. "Richard has built an incredibly malicious financial structure. All the visible assets, the mansion, the cars, the investment accounts, they're all in your name, but purchased with illicit funds. Meanwhile, corporate debts and tens of millions in unpaid back taxes to the IRS have also been shifted to your name through those documents you signed unread." Diana's heart stopped. She knew it was bad, but she hadn't realized it was catastrophic. "Which means, if the FBI or the IRS show up tomorrow morning," Arthur continued, tapping the table, "Richard walks away clean. He can just claim he's a kept husband living off his wealthy wife. You will be viewed as the mastermind behind massive tax evasion and federal money laundering. We're not just talking fines, Diana. We're talking federal prison. 10 years minimum." Tears welled up in Diana's eyes, but she held them back. "What do I do, Arthur? Do I go to the police now?" Arthur shook his head firmly. "No. If you report it now, you go down with him. Your signature is on everything. The law relies on paper trails, and on paper, you consented to all of it. So what do I do? Just wait to get arrested?" Diana's voice cracked with panic. Arthur leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "There is one way out, but it is incredibly risky and requires immense courage. You have to be willing to lose absolutely everything." "You mean, we reverse his scheme?" "His greed is his fatal flaw," Arthur explained. "He wants to seize all this wealth to run away with his mistress. So, give it to him." Diana was stunned. "Give it to him? You mean hand over all the assets?" "Exactly. We make it look like you're surrendering. You beg him to take over all the assets, the house, the accounts, the stocks, claiming you can't handle the stress, or you want to focus on starting a family. Any excuse that feeds his ego." Arthur offered a faint, strategic smile. "But within that transfer deed, we will bury a clause of absolute liability assumption. Diana started to see the play. The second he signs it, Arthur continued. All rights and obligations transfer to him, including the illicit origins of the funds, including the IRS tax arrears, including all legal and criminal risks. You will lose your Beverly Hills mansion, your cars, your money. You will walk out of this marriage with absolutely nothing. A big fat zero. But you will be clean. You will be free. Arthur leaned back in the diner booth. The question is, Diana, are you prepared to live in poverty for your freedom, or do you want to cling to this wealth and live in constant fear of the federal government? Diana sat in silence for a long time. She looked out at the overcast Pasadena streets. She pictured life without the luxury that had wrapped her for a decade. No more designer bags, no more private drivers. She might have to live in a cramped apartment. Then, the memory of Richard's condescending sneer flashed in her mind. Chloe's mocking smile. If Diana fought for the money, she might end up rich, but she'd remain a victim of their manipulation. If she let it go, she took control. Richard loved money above all else. If Diana dangled the bait of total asset control, he would strike at it without a second thought, completely ignoring the legal fine print. Greed would blind him to the details. Diana turned her gaze back to Arthur. Her eyes were clear, sharp, and totally devoid of hesitation. Draft the papers, Arthur, she said firmly. I don't want his dirty money. Let Richard choke on the carcass he's been hiding. I just want peace. Arthur smiled, looking relieved and proud. A brilliant decision. We will set a very sweet trap. We'll title the document Master Power of Attorney and Asset Assumption Agreement. He'll feel like he hit the jackpot when he signs it. Wait, Arthur, Diana suddenly remembered. There's one asset he can't have. My mother's little bungalow in the valley. It's the only clean property. It was an inheritance from before we married. Absolutely. That is separate property. We will quietly exclude it from the schedule. Richard won't even look twice at a modest bungalow when he's being handed penthouses and millions in cash, Arthur replied. That day, in a vintage Pasadena diner, a war strategy was finalized. Diana wasn't using a gun or a sword to fight her husband. She was using a far deadlier weapon, her enemy's own greed. When Diana walked out of the diner, the sun had started peeking through the clouds. The air felt fresher. She knew the war had just begun. But for the first time, she was absolutely certain she was going to win. She would go home, put the mask of the naive, obedient wife back on, and hand her husband the keys to his own destruction with a sweet smile. Returning from her meeting with Arthur, Diana didn't rest. She knew this plan required an Oscar-worthy performance. She had to kill off the intelligent, critical Diana and resurrect the weak, dependent woman who knew nothing about the corporate world, the exact persona Richard believed was her true self. She changed into oversized sweatpants and a faded UCLA t-shirt, wiped off her makeup to look pale and exhausted, and messed up her hair. On the glass coffee table in the living room, she intentionally piled up credit card bills, bank notices, and several heavy IRS tax forms she dug out of a drawer. She created a visual chaos perfectly engineered to trigger Richard. At exactly 8 p.m., the roar of Richard's G-Wagon echoed in the driveway. The front door swung open, and he walked in looking sour. He likely had a bad day at the office, or perhaps a fight with Chloe. However, the moment he saw the messy living room, his sour face twisted into disgust and annoyance. Jesus, Diana, what is this, a frat house? Richard barked, lightly kicking the coffee table. I work my ass off to provide, and I come home to a mountain of garbage. What do you even do all day? You can't even organize some mail. Normally, Diana's heart would sink at the yelling, but tonight, her heart was ice cold. She put on a panicked expression. Her hands shook as she picked up a letter from the bank. I'm sorry, honey. I have a massive migraine, Diana's voice quivered, sounding exactly like someone on the brink of a despair-fueled breakdown. The phone has been ringing off the hook all day. The bank wants transaction confirmations. The IRS sent warning letters. I read one paragraph, and I don't even know what the words mean. My head feels like it's going to explode. Diana collapsed onto the sofa, massaging her temples dramatically. I'm terrified of giving the wrong answer, Richard. If I say the wrong thing, you'll be furious with me. I'm so exhausted being terrorized by numbers I don't understand. Richard scoffed, tossing his briefcase onto a chair. He looked at her with that deeply familiar, degrading stare. God, you get a headache over basic admin? Use your brain for once. It's elementary. I'm not as smart as you, Richard, Diana interrupted, raising her voice slightly, not to fight back, but to emphasize her helplessness. I'm just a housewife. I'm not cut out for this. Before I stress myself out and make a fatal mistake that ruins you, Diana held her breath, then cast her ultimate bait. How about we just transfer all the assets in my name over to you? Everything. This house, the investment accounts, the stocks, all of it. Silence. Richard, who was in the middle of loosening his tie, froze. His eyes narrowed, studying Diana suspiciously. But behind that suspicion, Diana saw a powerful flash of interest. Greed was taking the wheel. What do you mean? Richard asked slowly, his tone softening slightly but still guarded. Put it all in your name, Diana whined again. Let the bank and the IRS deal directly with you. You're brilliant. You understand the law. You know business. If the assets are in your name, you can do whatever you want without waiting for my signature, without having to explain things to my slow brain. I trust you 100%. Diana looked up at him with fabricated adoration. I just want to live peacefully, taking care of the house, cooking for you, without being chased by government letters that give me migraines. The corner of Richard's mouth twitched, fighting a smile. This was a dream come true for him. He had always wanted to legally possess everything, but was hindered by procedures because the assets were bought under Diana's name to shield him. If Diana was begging him to take it was a goldmine falling into his lap. No coercion needed. No future messy divorce battles over assets. Richard cleared his throat, trying to mask his overwhelming excitement. He sat next to her and put an arm around her shoulders, something he hadn't done in months. Actually, that's a very smart idea. Not because I want to hoard it, but for our family's security. If you hold it, the risk of you getting scammed is high because you're too naive. I know, honey. I'm totally self-aware. Diana agreed rapidly. But the legal process for transferring it is so complicated. It takes lawyers, time. She baited him, playing hard to get. Well, actually, it's funny you say that, Diana continued with lethal innocence. Arthur Vance stopped by this afternoon to drop off some paperwork regarding my dad's estate. I ended up venting to him about how stressed I am managing all these assets. He said he could draft a blanket power of attorney for us. He called it a full asset management transfer. Said it would be super practical. Richard paused. Arthur Vance's name was a guarantee of quality. The senior attorney was known to be strictly by the book. Richard would never suspect a document from Vance contained a trap. He just assumed the old lawyer was indulging his clueless client. Oh, Vance is drafting it? Richard asked, his eyes gleaming. It's not done yet. He said he'd courier it over tomorrow or the day after, Diana said. But the point is, I'll sign whatever you need to move this burden onto you. Please, honey? Diana begged pitifully. Richard chuckled and kissed Diana's forehead. A Judas kiss. All right, since you're insisting. As a good husband, I'll take this burden off your shoulders. You just relax at home. Let me manage our empire. Thank you, Richard. You really are the best husband, Diana said, hugging him around the waist. She buried her face in his broad chest, hiding the cold, calculating smile slowly etching onto her lips. He swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. That night, Richard slept soundly, likely dreaming of his new life with Chloe and their massive wealth, free from his annoying wife. Diana lay awake next to him, staring at his back with a hollow yet satisfied feeling. She knew that once Richard signed Arthur's documents, he wasn't just acquiring assets. He was acquiring a VIP pass to legal and financial annihilation. Her performance as the submissive fool had successfully opened the gates of hell for her husband, and he was walking in willingly, bursting with pride. Enjoy your fake victory tonight, Richard, Diana thought. Because tomorrow, reality is going to bite. The next day, at a high-end steakhouse in downtown LA, Richard sat across from Chloe. It was supposed to be a romantic lunch, but the stench of greed overpowered the aroma of the dry-aged ribeye on their table. Richard had just recounted last night's events, how easily Diana surrendered, and practically begged him to take the assets. Chloe almost choked on her martini from pure joy. Her eyes sparkled deviously, like she was watching gold bars fall from the ceiling. "Are you serious? The housewife asked for it herself?" Chloe confirmed, gripping Richard's arm excitedly. "She's not suspicious at all? Didn't ask why it all has to be transferred?" Richard laughed condescendingly, slicing his steak. "Not in the slightest, babe. You know how she is. She's terrified of her own shadow. A couple of letters from the IRS, and she's shaking. She thinks giving it to me magically makes her problems disappear. Little does she know, she just handed us the keys to the vault." Chloe smiled broadly, but her expression quickly turned serious. Her predator instincts kicked in. "Richard, if that's true, you have to move fast. Don't give her time to rethink it. You know women, her mood could swing. If one of her girlfriends gets in her ear, the whole plan falls apart." Chloe leaned in, whispering urgently. "Besides, I heard rumors from our guy at the bank. The federal audit team is starting to flag the transactions. We need to secure the assets, put them in your name, and wire it to Dubai before they freeze her accounts. If it's still in her name, we need her signature for every wire, and that's too risky now." Chloe's words made sense. Richard felt the urgency to seize total control. With the assets legally his, he could liquidate the properties and move the cash offshore without forging Diana's signature or manipulating her anymore. Relax, babe. Vance's draft should arrive this afternoon. The second it gets there, I sign it, she signs it. By tomorrow, the world is ours, Richard said confidently. That afternoon, a thick manila envelope arrived at the estate. The return address clearly read, Vance and Associates Law Firm. Diana accepted the package from the FedEx courier with a steady hand and placed it on Richard's desk. She didn't open it. She knew exactly what was inside, having dictated the trap clauses to Arthur herself. When Richard got home, he snatched the envelope impatiently. In his home office, with the door slightly ajar, he pulled out the thick stack of documents. Diana peeked from a distance, pretending to water the indoor plants, her ears tuned sharply to his every move. Richard sat in his executive chair, flipped on his desk lamp, and began reading. The title was printed in bold, capitalized letters. Full Asset and Liability Transfer Agreement. Richard's eyes jumped straight to the appendix, his favorite part. Listed, there was all the wealth previously under Diana's name. The Beverly Hills Estate, 2 luxury condos in Manhattan, a $5 million stock portfolio, 3 priority bank accounts, and 2 European sports cars. Richard's smile was massive. He felt like a king conquering new territories. He was so mesmerized by the list of riches that he forgot the fundamental rule of business, reading the fine print. If Richard hadn't been so utterly blinded by greed, he would have read Section 3, buried in the middle of page 12. It read, The second party, Richard Evans, hereby agrees to accept the transfer of all aforementioned assets, along with all obligations inherently attached to them, including, but not limited to corporate debts, outstanding federal and state tax liabilities, ongoing legal disputes, and full civil and criminal responsibility regarding the source of funds utilized to acquire said assets. The first party, Diana Evans, is hereby wholly released and indemnified from any and all future legal claims or liabilities, effective immediately upon the execution of this agreement. It was a death sentence for Richard, a clause that physically took the ticking time bomb out of Diana's pocket and strapped it to Richard's chest. But Richard didn't read it. He just skimmed the pages, hunting for the signature lines. To him, this was just administrative red tape. He grossly underestimated Diana. He thought, how could a stupid housewife engineer a complex legal trap? In his mind, this was purely Arthur Vance fulfilling the mundane requests of his naive client. Diana, come here, Richard called out loudly. Diana walked into the office with slow steps. She arranged her face to look blank, yet slightly anxious. Did it arrive? Is it super complicated to read? Ah, standard stuff. Just typical legal mumbo-jumbo, Richard replied breezily, picking up his gold Mont Blanc. Bottom line is, everything transfers to me, so you don't have to stress about the IRS or bank notices anymore. You just sit back and relax. Really? Oh, thank God. Diana let out a highly convincing, dramatic sigh of relief. I was so scared to read something that thick. Where do I sign? Richard pointed to the line on the last page. Right here, above the notary seal. Print your full name. With hands purposefully made to tremble slightly, as if nervous about giving up her safety net, Diana signed her name. The ink on that page wasn't just a signature, it was the seal of her emancipation. The second the pen lifted from the paper, Diana officially became destitute on paper, but entirely free in the eyes of the law. After Diana, it was Richard's turn. With swift, arrogant, confident strokes, he signed his name on the receiving line. Scratch, scratch. The sound of Richard's pen was the most beautiful music Diana had ever heard. It was the sound of a prison cell door slowly locking behind her husband's back. Done, Richard announced, highly satisfied, closing the folder. Tomorrow I'll have the office courier send this back to Vance to finalize the legalities. You can rest easy now, Diana. Sleep well. I will. I feel so much lighter, Diana replied sincerely. Very sincerely. Richard had no idea that at that very moment, federal tax investigators and financial crimes units were already scrutinizing those exact assets. For months, they had hesitated to act because the assets were tied to a housewife with zero criminal record, making them wonder if it was an administrative error. But the moment those assets transferred to Richard, a businessman with a shady track record they had been monitoring, the puzzle was complete. Richard had just legally confirmed he was the mastermind. That night, Chloe called him. How'd it go, babe? All done? Completely done, my love. The ink is dry. The treasure chest is officially mine. Ours, Richard whispered on the balcony, completely unaware that Diana was standing behind the bedroom curtains, smiling coldly. The bait was swallowed whole. The hook was set deep in his throat. Diana just had to wait for the perfect moment to reel him in. The 30 minutes before Richard's departure would be the most crucial. The time on Diana's iPhone read 3 a.m. The night was dead silent, but inside the master bedroom, the tension was so thick it was suffocating. In the ensuite bathroom, the shower was running. Richard was bathing. It was his final ritual before leaving the house forever. He wanted to look fresh to meet the woman of his dreams, leaving behind his stupid wife, whom he believed was fast asleep under the heavy duvet. But Diana wasn't sleeping. As soon as the water pressure stabilized, her eyes snapped open. Her breathing was calm, but her brain fired like lightning. This was it, the final 30 minutes that would determine everything. Moving as silently as a cat, Diana threw off the covers and slid out of bed. Her bare feet hit the cold marble floor, but she didn't feel the chill. Adrenaline pumped heat through her veins. She walked to the walk-in closet. Richard's black Toomey suitcase was lying open, almost full, ready to be zipped. Inside were his finest tailored suits, silk shirts, and polished leather shoes. But there was one thing missing. The most important thing, his ticket to ruin. Diana tiptoed to the small desk in the corner of the room. Lying there was the thick manila folder. It held the asset transfer agreement Richard had signed that afternoon, now complete with the notary seal Arthur's team had fast-tracked. That document was no longer just paper. It was legal proof that Richard was the sole owner of all the wealth, and consequently, the sole owner of the massive federal crimes attached to it. Diana reached out and grabbed the folder. Her heart pounded as she slipped the thick document into the inner zippered mesh pocket of Richard's suitcase. You want the money, Richard? Take it, Diana whispered, almost inaudibly. Take the proof that you are the legal owner of all this dirty cash. But she wasn't done. She opened a false bottom drawer in his wardrobe, where Richard hid his little black book, a physical ledger containing manual transaction codes that were never entered into a computer. This book was the master key to Richard's entire money laundering operation. Richard had once warned her, his tone dripping with menace, if there is ever a raid or any danger, the first thing you do is burn this book to ashes. Understand? Tonight, Diana wasn't burning it. On the contrary, she wedged the small black ledger tightly between the neatly folded dress shirts inside his suitcase. Diana knew Richard's habits. He was too arrogant to double-check his packed clothes. He would assume the book was safe in its hiding spot. He had no idea the ledger was about to fly with him through international airport security. If Richard was caught carrying the asset transfer document and the illegal transaction ledger simultaneously, there wasn't a defense attorney on Earth who could save him. It was a complete suicide package. Click. The bathroom door handle turned. Diana flinched. Time was up. Moving rapidly but silently, she dove back into bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, and closed her eyes. She regulated her breathing, mimicking the deep, slow rhythm of someone deep in a dream. The bathroom door opened, letting out warm steam and the scent of masculine body wash. Richard walked out with a towel wrapped around his waist, humming a cheerful tune. The tune of a man who thought he had won. Diana peeked through her eyelashes. She watched him walk to the suitcase. He grabbed his Rolex from the vanity, strapped it to his wrist, and stood over the open bag. Diana's heart stopped. Was he going to check the pockets? Richard stared at the suitcase for a second. He patted the inner mesh pocket, feeling the thickness of the folder Diana had slipped inside. A sinister smirk crossed his face. Perfect, he muttered to himself. All the deeds and power of attorney docs are safe. What a dumb bitch. Sleeping like a baby while I walk out with her entire life. He didn't open the folder. He didn't dig through his shirts where the black ledger was hidden. His sky-high ego made him incredibly careless. He grabbed the zippers and forcefully pulled them shut. Zipe. The sound of the suitcase closing was like a symphony to Diana. That bag was no longer luggage. It was Richard's coffin, and he had just nailed it shut himself. Richard quickly got dressed. He threw on his favorite leather jacket, combed his hair back, and sprayed his cologne. He looked like a highly successful young executive, ready to conquer the world. He didn't realize he was actually getting dressed for his federal mugshot. Before leaving, Richard approached the bed. He stood right next to Diana. There was a pause of a few seconds. Did he feel guilty? Was there a shred of remorse for abandoning the woman who had stood by him for 10 years? Sorry, Diana, Richard whispered, his voice dry and devoid of any real emotion. You're just too boring for me. I need a challenge, and you're just dead weight. He turned around and grabbed the handle of his suitcase. The wheels glided silently across the thick carpet. Richard walked out the door without looking back. The door clicked shut. Diana opened her eyes wide in the dark. There was no pain from hearing his final words. Being called dead weight was just the ultimate confirmation that she was doing the right thing. She checked the clock. 2:55 a.m. Richard would need about 5 minutes to back out of the garage, and then 30 to 40 minutes down the empty 405 freeway to reach LAX. Diana sat up on the edge of the bed and switched on the nightstand lamp. The warm yellow light illuminated her calm, icy face. She grabbed her phone. She had a draft message prepared, addressed to Arthur Vance's private number. It was brief. The bird has flown with the locked cage. Release the hounds. She hit send. 30 minutes from now, when Richard met Chloe at the airport and they celebrated their fake victory, he would send her that degrading photo. And when he did, Diana would smile reading it, knowing that at the international departure terminal, Richard's name was already blinking red in the federal immigration system, thanks to Arthur Vance's quiet coordination with the authorities since yesterday afternoon. Diana walked to the window and parted the curtains slightly. Down below, Richard's black G-Wagon reversed out of the gates. The red taillights pierced the darkness, turning a corner and disappearing into the night. Safe travels, Richard, Diana said flatly. I hope you like the surprise waiting at the end of your trip. Once the engine noise had completely faded, silence returned to the massive Beverly Hills house. But the quality of this silence was entirely different. It wasn't the terrifying silence of walking on eggshells. It was peaceful, like the crisp morning air after a violent hurricane. Diana didn't go back to sleep. She walked slowly down the hallways of her home. She went to the main living area and flipped on every single light switch until the room usually kept dim because Richard preferred an exclusive, moody atmosphere was blazing bright. She stood in the center of the living room, spread her arms wide, and slowly spun in a circle. Empty, she whispered, smiling. It felt strange. Physically, the expensive Italian leather sofas, the million-dollar abstract art, the towering ceramic vases, they were all still there. But the house felt entirely hollow. The aura of dominance, intimidation, and negative energy that had suffocated Diana for a decade had rolled out the door with Richard's black suitcase. The room felt incredibly spacious. Diana breathed easily, feeling as if her lung capacity had just doubled. She realized it wasn't the square footage of the house that made her feel trapped. It was the presence of a man who never valued her. Meanwhile, speeding down the 405 toward LAX, Richard pushed the G-Wagon well over the speed limit. Upbeat music blasted from the premium audio system, matching his racing, euphoric heartbeat. He felt like a teenager breaking out of boarding school. "Finally," Richard shouted, smacking the steering wheel gleefully. Finally free from that boring housewife. His mind was already miles away in Dubai, and then maybe Europe. He pictured his new life with Chloe. No more playing the good husband, no more sneaking around. And most importantly, he had the keys to the kingdom in the back seat. He felt like an untouchable genius. Arriving at the Tom Bradley International Terminal, Richard parked the SUV carelessly in the drop-off zone. He didn't care if it got ticketed or towed. The car was in Diana's name anyway. Not his problem anymore. He eagerly yanked his suitcase from the trunk and took long strides into the departure lobby. From a distance, he spotted Chloe. She was standing near a pillar, wearing a chic cream trench coat with oversized designer sunglasses perched on her head, looking trendy and flashy. "Babe!" Richard called out. Chloe turned, her face lighting up. She jogged over and threw her arms around him, uncaring of the busy early morning airport crowd. "You're 10 minutes late, I was having a heart attack." Chloe whined playfully, though her eyes immediately darted to the Toomey suitcase in his hand. "You brought it, right?" Richard patted the suitcase proudly. "Safe and sound. Everything is in here. The deeds, the power of attorney, the bank tokens, even the Holy Grail ledger. We're filthy rich, Chloe. We won by a landslide." Chloe let out a muffled squeal and kissed his cheek. "That housewife is insane. She literally has no idea she's instantly broke tonight. She's probably drooling on her pillow right now." Richard laughed. "She won't realize a thing until she goes to buy groceries tomorrow and her card gets declined." They both laughed wickedly, mocking the fate of a woman they pictured crying pitifully at home. "Hey." A malicious idea popped into Chloe's head. She pulled out her phone. "Since we haven't gone through security yet, let's send her a goodbye present. Give her a heart attack when she wakes up." Richard's eyes gleamed. The idea stroked his massive ego perfectly. He wanted to crush Diana's dignity one last time. He wanted her to know that he was the one in control, that she was just useless garbage. "Great idea. Come here." Richard pulled Chloe tight against his side. They stood with the International Departures Board behind them. Click. A selfie was born, Richard grinning with pure arrogance. Chloe smirking, waving her first-class ticket. Richard immediately opened his texts. He found his wife's contact saved under a sarcastic nickname, the First Lady. His fingers flew across the screen, typing out the venom he'd held in for years. "Goodbye, useless woman. Sorry I didn't wake you up. Get ready to be homeless. You'll never catch me. Send." The delivered notification popped up. "Burn," Richard muttered with deep satisfaction. "Take that. Have fun in an empty house." Back in that quiet kitchen, Diana had just poured hot water into her mug when her phone vibrated on the marble counter. She wasn't surprised. It was right on schedule. Based on her math, Richard was at the airport. Diana gently set the kettle down. She picked up the phone and opened the notification. The photo loaded. Her husband and his mistress. Then the string of insults. Diana read it with zero expression. No heartache. No spilling tears. The insults were like a breeze hitting a reinforced concrete wall. In fact, every cruel word Richard typed only solidified Diana's belief that he deserved exactly what was coming to him in just a few minutes. "Useless woman." "Right," Diana mumbled, a dry smile crossing her face. "This useless woman is the one who just saved herself from the hellfire you created, Richard." She checked the clock. 2:40 a.m. Diana remembered her conversation with Arthur Vance yesterday. "My team has already coordinated with the federal authorities and TSA, Diana. The moment your husband's passport is scanned at the TSA checkpoint or the international terminal, the red notice will trigger. Because he is carrying the transfer documents legally tying him to millions in tax evasion and money laundering, he'll be flagged as an active flight risk carrying criminal evidence." Diana took a sip of her tea. She imagined the next scene. She couldn't see it, but she could feel the absolute satisfaction of it. Richard and Chloe, laughing confidently as they handed their passports to the TSA agent, entirely oblivious that the agent behind the desk was staring at a monitor, flashing bright red. Richard leaving wasn't just a marital separation. It was a toxic cleanse. The house, Diana's life, and her future were finally clean. "Enjoy your vacation, Richard," Diana whispered into the silent night. "I hope your suitcase is big enough to hold all your karma." Diana put her phone face down. She wasn't going to reply. Not yet. She'd let Richard enjoy his last 5 minutes as a free man before the long arm of the law grabbed him by the shoulder and dragged him back to a bitter reality. She stood up, turned off the kitchen lights, and walked to the small guest bedroom. She wasn't going to sleep in the master suite ever again. That room reeked of betrayal. Tomorrow, she'd hire someone to haul the mattress out and burn it. Tonight, she would sleep in the cramped but clean guest room, dreaming beautifully of true freedom. 1 week had passed since that night, the night a cruel text and an arrogant photo shattered the last ounce of a wife's patience, simultaneously marking the beginning of the sender's total ruin. This morning, the California sun poured through the blinds of a modest, older bungalow in the San Fernando Valley. It wasn't the sprawling Beverly Hills mansion with freezing marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It was the simple, whitewashed house Diana had inherited from her late mother. There was no central AC running, just a ceiling fan spinning lazily in the living room. Diana sat in a wicker chair on the front porch, holding a simple bowl of oatmeal she made herself. She ate it happily. Strangely, this $2 bowl of oatmeal tasted infinitely better than the imported dry-aged steaks she used to force down while living in a state of constant anxiety. On a small table in front of her, an older flat-screen TV played the local morning news. Diana purposely turned it on, waiting for the crime segment that had been the talk of LA high society all week. Sure enough, his face appeared on the screen. Richard? But not the arrogant, narcissistic face from the airport selfie. The face on the screen was haggard. His eyes were sunken with dark, heavy circles. His hair a greasy mess. He was wearing an orange federal jumpsuit. His wrists were heavily shackled. The news anchor read the report in a serious tone. Disgraced businessman Richard Evans, believed to be the mastermind behind a massive $50 million money laundering and federal tax evasion syndicate, has been formally remanded to federal custody after being apprehended at LAX last week. The arrest was highly unusual, as authorities state the suspect was caught attempting to flee the country while carrying the entirety of the physical evidence, linking him to the crimes inside his carry-on luggage. Diana smiled faintly, taking the last spoonful of her oatmeal. The plan had executed even more flawlessly than she'd hoped. She remembered Arthur Vance calling her the day after the arrest. Richard and Chloe had been laughing on their way to the security checkpoint. The moment the TSA agent scanned Richard's passport, alarms silently tripped. Within seconds, armed federal agents and airport police swarmed him. Richard had initially thrown a massive, arrogant fit, screaming, "Do you know who I am? I'm a successful CEO. I will sue every single one of you." But his arrogance completely shattered when the FBI opened his black Toomey suitcase right there on a stainless steel table. Neatly wedged between his Tom Ford shirts was the black ledger of illegal transactions. And worst of all, the full asset and liability transfer agreement he had just signed. The FBI didn't even have to work hard to build a case. Driven by his own greed, Richard had hugged the evidence tight to his chest. The document he viewed as a certificate of absolute victory was actually a signed confession. The document explicitly stated that Richard was the sole owner and took full, unquestionable liability for all funds flowing through the flagged accounts. His fresh signature, sitting right above the notary stamp, was absolute proof that no high-priced defense lawyer could argue against. And Diana? Diana was totally clean. The indemnity clause in that document legally shielded her from any federal prosecution. Because Richard had explicitly assumed all liabilities, he thought he was stealing her wealth, but he had actually bought his own prison sentence. And what about Chloe? The news cameras caught a glimpse of the young woman covering her face with a designer bag, being escorted out of a federal building after questioning. Rumor had it that at the airport, the moment the cuffs went on, Richard and the agents announced all his assets were frozen by the federal government. Chloe's face went ghost white. The undying love she swore to him evaporated instantly. Right there in front of the feds, Chloe screamed hysterically, "I don't know anything. I'm just his secretary. He asked me to go on a trip. Please don't arrest me. This man conned me." Richard could only stare in pure shock at the woman he had thrown his wife away for. Chloe, the mistress he was so proud of, abandoned ship the exact second it started sinking. She even voluntarily handed her unlocked phone over to the FBI to prove Richard was the mastermind, doing anything she could to save her own skin from conspiracy charges. A traitor betrayed by a traitor. It was a cycle of karma, so poetic it belonged in a museum. Diana turned off the TV. She didn't need to see any more. To her, Richard was ancient history. The Beverly Hills mansion, the European sports cars, the Manhattan condos, the investment accounts bought with dirty money, all seized by the US government. Diana walked out of that marriage without taking a single penny of alimony or marital assets. The outside world might look at Diana and see a tragic victim. A divorced woman who fell from high society, evicted from her palace, forced to live in a modest valley home. Her former Beverly Hills socialite friends were probably gossiping and laughing at her in their group chats. But Diana couldn't care less. She stood up, took her empty bowl, and walked inside. Standing in her small living room, she felt richer than she had in her entire life. She didn't have millions in the bank, but she had something Richard never did: peace of mind. She didn't have to jump every time someone knocked on the door. She didn't have to panic reading news about the IRS. She didn't have to pretend to be an idiot to protect a fragile narcissist's ego. On her mother's old, weathered vanity sat a manila envelope. It was a letter from the Los Angeles County Family Court. Her divorce proceedings were underway. Because Richard was incarcerated and his assets seized, the process was expected to be incredibly fast. A default judgment without the defendant present. Diana looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her face was bare, free of heavy makeup. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, but her eyes were bright and full of life. "You did it, Diana," she whispered to her reflection. "You walked out of a burning building without a single blister." Today, Diana planned to plant some flowers in the small front yard. It was a trivial hobby Richard used to forbid, because it was dirty and low class. Now, nobody could tell her no. Her hands would be dirty with potting soil, not dirty money. And to Diana, that was the truest form of luxury. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Diana answered. "Hello, Mrs. Evans." A deep, gruff voice spoke. "This is from the Twin Towers Correctional Facility. We have a request from an inmate, Richard Evans. He is begging you to come visit him. He says he wants to apologize. And he's asking if you could bring him some fresh clothes, because none of his family or friends will answer his calls." Diana paused. The gentle California morning breeze brushed against her face. She pictured Richard, miserable behind iron bars, all alone, abandoned by Chloe, shunned by his business partners, and now begging the wife he once called useless. A smile bloomed on Diana's face. Not a smile of revenge, but the smile of closing a book. "I'm sorry, officer," Diana replied with a polite but firm tone. "Please pass a message to him. Tell him his useless's wife is too busy enjoying her new life. And as for clothes, didn't he pack a suitcase full of designer suits? Tell him to wear those until they rot off his back." Diana hung up. She put her phone down, grabbed a small gardening trowel, and walked out into the yard. The sun was climbing higher, shining down on a new life that was simple, yet entirely free. 6 months had passed, more than enough time to flip someone's destiny 180 degrees. Behind the high walls of the federal penitentiary, Richard sat silently in the corner of his damp cell. His once fit, heavily groomed body was now gaunt and pale. His skin was dull. There was no lingering scent of Tom Ford. Only the smell of bleach and profound, delayed regret. Every night, Richard was haunted by one specific memory. Diana's face as she signed the asset transfer agreement. At the time, he saw the face of a clueless idiot. Now, he realized he had been looking at the face of a chess grandmaster, allowing her opponent to take a pawn just to deliver a brutal checkmate on the next move. Richard gripped the cold iron bars. He had lost absolutely everything. His wealth was seized to cover the massive federal restitution. His company was liquidated. Chloe, the woman he risked it all for, had already married an older, wealthy tech investor 2 months after Richard was sentenced. Nothing was left. The useless woman he had so deeply insulted turned out to be the only person who had ever been truly loyal to him, and he had thrown her away himself. Meanwhile, on the porch of the modest valley bungalow, Diana was busy arranging glass jars filled with artisanal cookies. The rich aroma of browned butter and vanilla filled the air. Since escaping Richard, Diana returned to a hobby he had banned: baking. Who would have thought that a small cottage industry baking business, started in her mother's tiny kitchen, would blow up? Orders poured in from neighbors, local cafes, and old friends from college who had eagerly welcomed her back into their lives. The money she made wasn't millions like Richard's dirty cash, but every single dollar felt like a blessing. She could spend it in total peace, without ever looking over her shoulder for the FBI. An older sedan pulled up to the curb. Arthur Vance stepped out, wearing his signature warm smile and carrying a green legal folder. Diana wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and warmly welcomed the old lawyer. "Please sit, Arthur. Can I get you some coffee or tea?" "Don't trouble yourself, Diana. I'm just here for a moment," Arthur declined politely, taking a seat in a wicker chair. He placed the green folder on the table. "I bring good news." The judge signed the final decree. Since Richard is incarcerated and didn't contest, it sailed through. Diana reached out and touched the folder. Inside was her final divorce decree, a piece of paper that legally severed the chains tying her to a dark past. "What happened to the Beverly Hills house, Arthur?" Diana asked. "Just making small talk. It's going on the federal auction block next week. It's been totally cleared out. Every penny of the sale will go to pay his IRS fines," Arthur explained. He looked at Diana closely. "Are you sure you don't regret it, Diana? If you want, we could try to petition the court for a small fraction of the clean assets." Diana shook her head quickly, cutting him off with a genuine smile. "No, Arthur. Not a single cent. Let the government take it all. That money has no soul. I refuse to let my clean new life get splattered by the mud of my past." Arthur nodded proudly. "You are an incredible woman, Diana. Your father is looking down, very proud of you." After Arthur left, Diana sat alone on the porch. She opened the green folder, reading the judge's decree. Printed clearly at the bottom: marriage dissolved. Diana closed the folder and took a deep breath. The morning air felt so incredibly fresh. It felt like the oxygen itself was infused with hope. She looked out at the quiet residential street. No luxury cars, no gated security, no excessive wealth. But in her chest, there was an expanse of peace, so vast it was immeasurable. She picked up her iPhone. There was one last thing she needed to do to close this book forever. She opened her blocked contacts list. Sitting right there was Richard's number, now being used by his public defender to constantly send messages begging for her help. Diana hit delete contact. "Gone," she whispered softly with a single tap of her finger. Richard's name vanished forever from her phone, along with the remaining pain in her heart. Diana didn't hate Richard. To hate meant to still care. Diana had reached a much higher level: total indifference. To her, Richard was just a stranger who had briefly passed through an episode of her life, leaving her with the invaluable lesson of how to stand on her own 2 feet. The sun climbed higher, its golden light hitting Diana's face. She stood up, straightened her apron, and got ready to head back into the kitchen. There was cookie dough to be baked, customers to serve, and a brand new life to be lived with absolute joy. She was once called a useless woman and threatened with homelessness. But today, she stood tall as the queen of her own little castle, rich with peace, and swimming in genuine happiness. Diana smiled and gently pulled her front door shut. The story of her sorrow was officially over. The greatest victory isn't when we successfully destroy those who hurt us. It's when we successfully break free from them and live happily without ever looking back. The most valuable wealth isn't a mountain of money or luxury assets, but peace of mind and freedom from fear. The greedy will fall by their own greed, while the patient and intelligent